Hey everybody, Taz from Critical Thinking Anarchist here, and I wanted to do this for a little while here. If you know anything about Minnesota politics, and if you know anything about me, I've mentioned it before. I'm a Minnesotan. I no longer live in the state. I'm not saying where I'm living at the moment, but I moved out not intentionally as a result of this, but as a result of Minnesota politics. But um, I can't say I'm one of those people who never thought I would leave, and I didn't want to leave at the time I left, and now I'm glad I did. Um, but anyway, Minnesota has become a hugely divided state. We used to lean, we Minnesotans for the most part consider ourselves fiscally conservative, socially liberal, um, which means we want balanced budgets. We don't want to spend too much on taxes. We don't want high taxes, but we also don't want to sit here. We don't want to allow social issues to be a problem. Unfortunately, social issues have become the absolute thing. Taxes have gone skyrocketing. Minnesota is the highest at least in the northern Midwest, the highest tax state in comparison. I mean, you look at North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, even, and Wisconsin, and Minnesota is well and above beyond all of them in as far as their sales tax go, and their property taxes had been relatively low in comparison, but now the property taxes are going through the roof, and people are wanting them to go up every single year, subject to inflation. So they're like trying to catch up, quote unquote, as a bunch of these counties have stated, and and they're saying now that they want to tie them to cost of inflation once they catch up. So they're raising them double digit percentages to get there, and then in 2 to 3 years, when they get up there, then they're gonna do cost of living, cost of inflation, tie them to inflation, and so it'll automatically go up as inflation goes up. Anyway, I apologize for all that. So Minnesota has in the fairly recent past had a history of electing horrible people. Um, Governor Dayton, Governor Walz, to name just a couple. Um, and this past year, it went almost exactly 50-50. In the Senate, it is 33-33 with the unfortunate passing of a senator who died right before the new year as a result of cancer. The Senate in Minnesota has decided on a power sharing agreement, 50, basically everything 50-50. In the House, on the other hand, even though it is 50-50, 67-67, that is a direct result of um, that is a direct result. Well, so the person, one of the people, was blatantly caught cheating. Lived in Little Canada, but went to Roseville to try and become the candidate. Now in Minnesota, you have to live in the state for at least a year and be a resident of the district for at least 6 months. So this person rented an apartment in Roseville. Little Canada and Roseville are like maybe 5 miles apart. Rented an apartment in Roseville. In May, the Republican candidate was told, hey, by the way, this person is not actually living there. He's living in Little Canada. He is not spending any time in this apartment. So his entire family is in Little Canada. Meanwhile, he's rented an apartment in Roseville. And they do surveillance on him starting in August, collect all this evidence showing his cars are always in Little Canada. His family's in Little Canada. Nothing's moved. So it's not like this, it's not like, hey, we're trying to sell the house, we're trying to move everybody, but it's taking time, and I'm trying to spend the time in Roseville type of thing. It wasn't like one of those things, it wasn't like, well, I mean, I moved right after that deadline, but in the spirit of the rule type of thing. No, this person was blatantly caught cheating. And the Democrats, instead of doing what they should have done and said, hey, we had it on good faith that this person was living and working in Roseville, said, oh, well, you should have brought that up before the election. That was the time to bring this up. That was, and the Minnesota Supreme Court wasn't buying it. They're like, no, you were caught cheating. You're blatantly caught cheating. Deal with it. So instead of trying to appeal, because the person would have had to, basically perjure himself if he tried to say anything other than, I rented it and I wasn't working. Clearly, like I said, it wasn't like he was making every attempt. It wasn't like they had their house up for sale and the market was just tough and everything like that. It wasn't like they were trying to move out there or anything like that. It was blatantly like, no, I live over here and I just did this to try and skirt the rules. Oops. So he resigned completely, which left a vacant seat. So that means the Republicans actually have the House 67-66. Now, to make matters even more tough, in Shakopee, down on the southern side of the cities, candidates were the Republican and Democratic candidates were 20 votes apart, or no, 14 votes apart, 20 votes apart, something like that. The Democrat candidate won, but because 20 votes were thrown out on election night that were mail-in, the Republicans, obviously, they had to have a recount. They had to have a judge make a ruling. The judge made the ruling, after they supposedly canvassed people and supposedly found the people who sent in the votes, even the ballots, even though the ballots and their envelopes. Sorry, I had to make sure I got that right. The ballots on their envelopes had been thrown away. So supposedly they got the right people. Maybe they did, maybe they don't, who knows. The judge made the determination that, because they got the people, it was approximately 8 votes for the Democrat and 6 votes for the Republican, and they didn't think the other 6 votes would make enough of a difference because of that disparity. So they said, so the judge in this particular case said, in this particular case, I think the Democrat won. Now, as Republicans have noted, hey, you got the whole thing of going, how do you know? These ballots are supposed to be anonymous. Supposedly we got the right people, but you threw out the ballots and their envelopes, so we don't know. We don't know what's going on. We don't know that we canvassed the right 14 people on this, let alone you got another 6 people who may have gone the other way. So ideally, in their case, they would want a special election. On top of all that, right now we're waiting a Minnesota Supreme Court decision because the Democrats have been walking out. They have been boycotting. They have not stayed long enough to form a quorum. Now, the Republicans have argued that because only 133 people, only 133 people are elected at the moment, and there is a vacant seat, even with the other representative possibly having that other seat, which gives the Democrats 66. The Republicans right now have 67. 67 is a majority of the currently elected representatives, 133. Where Democrats say, no, it's static. Majority is elected of available seats. So you need 68 people within the House to make this. And again, I apologize. It's a long-winded thing. The Supreme Court held hearings on this yesterday and said, and gave them both their due, and rightfully so, And right now the Supreme Court is mulling it over and trying to decide if they should even be involved because they are co-equal branches of the government. So does the Minnesota Supreme Court even have the authority to tell the House how to define this? The House makes up their own rules. So the House itself could make up their own rules on this, which is what the Republicans are basically kind of trying to say on that. Anyway, so right now everything's kind of in limbo as far as that goes. However, so what we're going to go here, this is, if you remember back in 2012, this was a big thing back in 2012 with Wisconsin. And they left the House to go to or they left the legislature, because I can't remember right offhand, we'll read it. They left the legislature to go to Wisconsin. But we'll get to that one specifically. This is a big thing that Democrats do, apparently. They just leave. They're like, oh, we don't like this, so we're taking our ball and we're going home. So this goes back a long way, which is interesting. So this is from Channel 5, KSTP.com, local Minnesota channel. Democrats in the Minnesota House who have boycotted daily sessions are using tactics that lawmakers around the country have tried at least 24 times before to thwart their opponents. It's not even a first for the state. Minnesota Democrats are trying to prevent Republicans from taking advantage of a temporary one-seat majority caused by a vacancy in a Democratic-leaning seat and have even asked the state Supreme Court to intervene. After a special election, the House will likely be tied at 67. The Senate is temporarily tied at 33, also because of a vacancy in a Democratic district. So going back to 1857, the issue was Republicans' desire to move the Minnesota Territory's capital from St. Paul to a new city, St. Peter, about 75 miles away. A Democratic lawmaker took physical possession of the bill and hid in a local hotel until it was too late to act on the measure. That would have been interesting. So that would have made the capital of St. Paul, the capital city of Minnesota, down in south central Minnesota instead of in the Twin Cities area. I don't know how that would have been. That would have greatly changed the way the state has been run for the last 200, 150 years, 170 years almost. That would be interesting. Yeah. 1863, Indiana. No legislature, no problem. Whoops, sorry. Democratic legislators wary of the Civil War tried to wrest control of the state militia from ardently pro-union Republican Governor Oliver Morton. Fellow Republicans thwarted the effort by heeding his call to bolt, closing down the state's General Assembly. Morton ran the state without a legislature through 1864, soliciting private and federal loans to finance state government and doling the funds out from a large safe in his office. So, I mean, that's kind of funny, right? So you got the legislature going, oh, well, we're going to prevent you from doing this. And the governor's like, all right, I'll just do it myself then. 1893, Kansas, the legislative war. With several 1892 races in dispute, both populists and Republicans claimed a majority in the state house. So this is basically the same thing that we got going on here. A month into lawmakers' annual session, populist lawmakers locked themselves in and Republicans out. Overnight in the House chamber, the next day, the GOP House Speaker used a sledgehammer to break down a door so Republicans could go in and chase the populists out. The Kansas Supreme Court eventually settled the contested races in Republicans' favor, giving them the majority. The sledgehammer is on display in the State House. That's awesome. AOC would say she was violently attacked in that particular thing. This one is scary. 1924 Rhode Island, a filibuster riot and gas attack. Democrats sought to end the grossly unequal representation in the state legislature that had cemented Republican dominance and proposed holding a convention to revise the Rhode Island Constitution for that purpose. Gerrymandering. They didn't like the fact that they were constantly losing and wanted to gerrymander the like, oh hey, well let's just change the entire state because we don't like what's going on here. They hope to slip their measure past the GOP's one-seat Senate majority by filibustering long enough that a few Republicans would fall asleep or leave. I don't have a problem with filibustering. I like the filibuster. A lot of people don't like the filibuster. I like the filibuster. I don't have a problem with that. Granted, you're talking literally 100 years ago. I don't have a problem with that. That is a perfectly reasonable and responsible way to govern. Is, hey, we're gonna talk until someone's gonna do this. Either the side or a person or whatever. The talking filibuster has been used even fairly recently, and I love it. I even if I disagree with the other side, you know what? That is a perfectly legal way to do this, and it's well within the rules of legislature. There's a reason it's in legislature. They began in January and kept it up for more than 5 months. That is insane. 5 months of filibuster. In mid-June, a fight over who could preside over a daily Senate session touched off what accounts called a brief riot among senators. Again, that's awesome. 2 days later, a device left in the chamber released noxious gas, clearing it. Republicans eventually fled to a hotel in Massachusetts and stayed there the rest of the year. And then, like I said, that's disturbing. That's scary. Especially in today's world. Thankfully, that wasn't today's world. they don't really go into detail of what it was at the time, but I hope nobody gets any ideas from that. I do not condone that. I do not advocate for that. I do wholeheartedly advocate for a filibuster. 1934 North Dakota, a pretended session. A federal jury convicted GOP Governor William Langer of political corruption, and he called a special legislative session to have lawmakers investigate his conviction. He was ousted from office but declared martial law. Again, another scary thing. The new governor, Republican Ole Olson, canceled the special session, but a quorum of the House convened anyway, having the first meetings in the new, still unfinished Capitol. The Senate didn't have enough members to do business, and after 5 days, the House recessed and members went home. So, an unfortunate version there. I'm not really entirely sure how that one fits into all this because nobody left. 1979, the Texas Killer Bees. A dozen liberal Democratic senators, known as the Killer Bees for their tactics in derailing legislation, objected to a plan to change the date of the state's GOP presidential primary in 1980 to help former Texas Governor John Connally. The Killer Bees fled the state capitol, bunked down in a staffer's garage, and evaded capture by the Texas Rangers for 4 days. Their absence killed the plan. Democrats used the same tactic in 2003. House members went to Oklahoma, and senators later fled to New Mexico, but failed to thwart a Republican congressional redistricting plan. Again, when your tactic is this, like you're known for this, that's ridiculous. Similarly, in 2021, Democrats were initially successful in killing a restrictive voting measure by walking out just before a midnight deadline to pass it. They couldn't block it again during a special session when Republicans had law enforcement bring them back after they flew to Washington. On taxpayer money, no less. 2011, Wisconsin, Democrats flee over union rights. And this is the one I remember. This was the big one, and oh, God, it angered me so much for this. Democratic state senators fled to Illinois, blocking a vote on GOP Governor Scott Walker's plan to strip most public workers of their union rights, while pro-union protesters descended on the state capitol. The stalemate ended several weeks later after Republicans weakened their legislation. The walkout inspired House Democrats in Indiana to also flee to Illinois to win concessions from Republicans on education and labor bills. See, and I don't like this. The whole thing on the quorum, this was written at a time when people didn't have reliable transportation. Especially, so we'll go to Minnesota on this one. Minnesota is a fairly large state. You have a lot of rural area. You're up north near Canada, near the Boundary Waters, et cetera, near the Great Lakes, near Lake Superior at any rate. Near the Dakotas, where you have giant plains. So you have a lot of area that just couldn't receive, you're talking during the winter months, it's near impossible to travel. Every winter for, sometimes, a couple days to sometimes a couple months, even, the I-90 corridor near North Dakota and in North Dakota is shut down because you literally cannot travel. Because it is literally, you got snowdrifts like crazy. You have heavy snow, blowing snow. You just can't get around. So from in North Dakota through northwestern Minnesota, it's almost impossible to get down anywhere. To move, in fact. So that's what this whole thing was about. They were trying to allow representation, allow districts to have the representatives within the capital, not to abuse it because you're a big frickin' baby and like, I don't like what you're doing, so I'm leaving. There's a couple others on this as well, but basically you get the idea. It's the Democrat playbook, and yes, I know I see this one here. In 2023, Oregon, a record GOP boycott. Since the early 70s, Oregon legislators in both parties have boycotted daily sessions. So apparently, this is a big thing in Oregon to just boycott, to just leave. But for the most part, this is almost like very, very clearly a Democrat tactic. This is not a Republican tactic. And the thing is, depending on how the Supreme Court rules, this could end up hurting the Democrats more in the long run, because say they keep this up, the special election for the Roseville seat is not until the end of February, mid-February. Say that goes to the Democrats, it probably will. And say they have to recognize the other guy in Shakopee so that it is a full 67-67. Well, if it's ruled that 68 is a quorum, when the Democrats decide to come back, the GOP could do exactly the same thing and say, well, guess what? We're leaving. No session, no quorum, period, end of statement. And legally, if the Supreme Court decides this, legally they would have no leg to stand on because they open the door to this. So in my view, this is very bad. This is double bad for Democrats, because it means 2 months of them not showing up and doing this. And this is the big thing. I'm fully on the whole of this. If you're not there, if you're not in the House, you shouldn't get paid. If you're not working, you shouldn't get paid. And they're saying like, oh, well, we're working. We're taking tours of things on taxpayer money. We're talking to, business leaders and this and that. It's like, you're paid by the taxpayers to be in your offices, not gallivanting around, not being almost impossible to find, because if they could be found, that would be then they wouldn't have to worry about any of this stuff. But they never learn. It's the same tactics over and over again. And they blame the Republicans. Well, you don't like, hey, you guys blatantly got caught cheating. Like, yeah, if you hadn't got caught cheating, sure. You know what? I would agree with you in the point of, you should share the power. But you got caught cheating, blatantly cheating. And you didn't even have the foresight to throw the guy under the bus and say, hey, we didn't realize this. If we had realized this, we would not have chosen him. If we had thought, at any point that, everybody knows you're lying, but to do what they did and say, well, no, you should have brought this up earlier. You were cheating. You're blatantly cheating. Take responsibility for it. But yeah, they never learn. And anyway, let me know what you guys think. Comments and, comments below. Like, share, subscribe, all the other fun stuff. I will see you next time. You take care. Bye for now.